Yeah. Good afternoon. Hopefully you are fueled, you are energized, you're awake. I know it's towards the end of the day. I know you are probably already thinking about the vodka and the beer that I'm sure you'll all be having this evening. I know I will. I think you can't see this. Yeah, this is probably the biggest my face has ever been on a screen, and I love that. I'm not going to talk too much about myself. What I want to talk about is continuous improvement at scale, going beyond retrospectives across the enterprise. You can see on the screen some stuff about me. The only thing I really want to highlight here is that for me, the key to agility is continuous improvement. The key to continuous improvement is retrospectives, and at the heart of retrospectives are individuals and interactions. So I make it my goal to foster and enable those interactions. Because it's towards the end of the day, let's start by waking you up. Who here has played Never Have I Ever before? See some hands being raised. Again, usually it's saved for a drink. I'll teach you how to play. I'm going to say a statement, and if you've done it, you're going to take a metaphorical drink, or a real one if you've got a coffee or a tea or whatever. So what I want you to do first is imagine your favorite drink and hold it in the air. Okay, I can see some hands raised. Good, you got your favorite drink. Never have I ever been to an ACE conference. Nasrabe. Yeah, you've all done it, so you should all be drinking there. Next one. Never have I ever focused too much on a framework. Yep, I've made that mistake too. Never have I ever skipped a retrospective. Well done for admitting it. Good work. Never have I ever wanted to improve something, but didn't have time. Yeah. So you don't need to use generic ways of learning that there are problems. This is just one example of it. You can do this in a retrospective. You can do this on a town hall style meeting with hundreds of people. Just have them hovering their cursors or moving little icons to represent if they've experienced that. And if they have, okay, that's a sign we've got something to focus on. What comes to mind when you see this? Because when I first saw this several years ago, it felt a bit like this. Thomas the Tank Engine. This is what Agile has become, and this is several years old. It's an absolute minefield. It doesn't render very well on this big screen, but all of these tiny little nodes over here, they're all examples of things that are under the Agile umbrella. Nowadays, when I look at this, I feel more like this. Anxiety-inducing, because if I ask all of you what Agile means right now, I would probably get 100 different answers. So if the Agile community struggles to articulate what Agile is, how do we expect people that don't know about Agile to understand what it is? And this is why I focus on continuous improvements rather than Agile itself. You heard Jenny earlier saying she doesn't even talk about Agile sometimes. I tend to do the same. And continuous improvement is backed and supported by pretty much every Agile framework out there. There is some underlying principle or value linked to continuous improvement, whether that's Heart of Agile, Modern Agile, the House of Lean, Less, Safe, even Hexy, the new thing from Dave Snowden. My focus is on continuous improvement. Before we go into some techniques and approaches you can use to not only identify areas to improve across a company, but also resolve them, I want to talk about local versus systemic problems. A local thing, a local problem, is something that affects maybe one team or a small group. Because it's only local, fixing it tends to take less time, tends to take less resources. An example of that might be a single team doesn't have a user experience developer, therefore they have a dependency on other teams. When we start looking at systemic things, they span teams of teams. They tend to go across the wider organization. And because they're larger, they take a lot more effort to fix, to resolve. They often require changes to structure, to ways of working across the whole system, enterprise systems like HR and security. They're very resource intensive, which makes them expensive to resolve. An example of that might be a legacy infrastructure that holds back quick, rapid development of a piece of software. So a story. I was working with a large multinational company. They had development capabilities across South Africa and Mexico, the UK and Poland, all over the world. And the situation was a larger part of that company, or the bigger company, bought a smaller one, which meant there was a big culture clash. The larger company was used to doing things a certain way. They had a lot more rigor and structure and bureaucracy. The smaller company, because they were smaller, they could do things a lot quicker. They could throw things into production. They were smaller, they didn't have the same regulatory requirements on them that the larger one did. The change manager responsible for this new combined company wanted to introduce a new change management process. And the way he did it was he wrote a Confluence page and he sent an email. And he said, in 2 weeks' time, this is what we're doing. How do we think that change landed with the people? Badly? Why? No one read the email. That's a great start. So communicating at once, assuming everyone read the email, okay? There's lots of reasons why that didn't go very well. He inflicted change upon people without clearly articulating why. He communicated it once. It was communicated in it's very set in stone, right? This is the way going forwards. So that caused some resistance. People didn't feel like it was going to be open to variation. People didn't understand it. And it was time-consuming. It was hard. So the consequence was that when people were asked to use this system, they didn't. And therefore, people weren't able to put things into the production estate, which means that the stakeholders start getting frustrated. Where's this thing we were waiting for? And the customers, and so on and so forth. So it became a big problem. I worked with the change manager to introduce that same change across the whole company a very different way. And it will leverage a lot of the techniques you've heard other speakers talking about throughout today. It talks about how we basically went in and clearly articulated the underlying reason why it was being brought in. The process wasn't being introduced to annoy people. It was a regulatory requirement. A company of this size needs to demonstrate that it is maintaining a safe production estate, given that there's a lot of personally sensitive information involved in this company. It was a gambling company. There was lots of regulatory processes around it. So articulating why it's being brought in. Introducing the change in a number of sessions at various different times that fit different time zones to ensure that everyone had the opportunity to understand the why, to share their concerns about it, and to remind them that it's not permanent. It's an experiment. We are going to try a new process targeting to try and improve the wider system, the wider change management process, to make it more rigorous, but not harder to use. And here is when we're going to reflect upon it again next in the future. So it was introduced as an experiment. Again, lots of the speakers have been talking about the power of experimentation. And a consequence of introducing it in that way was that people understood. They used the process. They knew that it was a trial, and they could learn and adjust in the future. So that was a situation where we knew the problem. What if you don't know the problem in the company, or what to focus on? I'm going to introduce you to 3 methods you can use to identify areas for improvement across the wider system. And just a note, the things that I share with you today, the tools, the techniques, all of them will be accessible as templates that you can use tomorrow if you want to, and you'll get those at the end of the session. Firstly, the pain avalanche. A great way to start is often just an open space, a location where people can say, here is something causing me pain. And you can even target that. If we were using this technique as part of the change management process, we could ask everyone, what is the thing that causes you the most pain about this change management process? And then you open it up. People can contribute anonymously if they need to, if there's a low level of psychological safety. And what that gets you is a large volume of data. You can then analyze that data. Where are the trends? Okay, it looks like the majority or the most cited pain is this. Okay, what can we do to address that pain? And you can use this as an anonymous survey. You can use it in a town hall style meeting. You can use it in a retro of retros if you're using scaled agile or some of the other larger frameworks where you get lots of people together en masse. Helps you identify the problem. Quick one though. I tend to speak very quickly when I get excited. So if I start speaking too quickly, wave at me, shout Nostradamus, do something. Don't struggle, okay? Practice it now. Nostradamus. Yeah, we go, that'll do. I'll take that. Thank you. The next one, health checks at scale. So this is using a Spotify-style health check. If you do that across one team, you learn their challenges. If you then scale that across all teams, you can start to spot some trends in the data. So the example here, you can see it's featuring several different teams. They have a problem with proactivity and stress. Krakow, we have a problem. Again, a way of visualizing where there are challenges across teams of teams. And the thing I love about these health checks, especially the Spotify style one, is that it's not some external consultant coming in and saying, this is your problem. It's the team's perspective, what they think they are struggling with. So this can be a great way to, and it's best run quarterly, every 3 months or so. Do the health check as part of a single retrospective for each team, aggregate the data. Oh, look, we've got some problems. And the best bit is this provides a big beacon to leadership. This is what your teams are saying. Help us fix this, please. Help us deal with the stress, the proactivity in the system. Another option is the 8 wastes. This is great for trying to minimize the waste in the system, the things holding you back from delivering value. The 8 wastes look a bit like this. You probably can't read this very well. The deck for this will be shared later, so you can read this in a bit more detail. But these are 8 wastes of software engineering from a book by Mary and Tom Poppendick. And these wastes, you can spot these, again, locally in a team, but also systemically. Examples are defects, extra processes, the governance, the bureaucracy that you don't need, delivering more features than are actually being asked for, handoffs between teams, that causes delays. So there's lots of these wastes. And again, you share the detail about what each of these wastes mean. You offer everyone the opportunity to say, this affects my team or not. And you can look at which ones show up. And you can see the bottom there. Time to rethink our processes. Most people were affected by extra processes. Right, what can we do now? How can we adjust the way we do governance to avoid that waste? So 3 methods there to identify a problem. We then want to talk about what to focus on, what you do next. How can you then collaboratively resolve those problems, bring about improvement? The impediment cyclone is a variation of a lean coffee that I created a few years ago. I learned during lean coffees, and Jim Benson's about to speak next, he's one of the creators of lean coffee. I learned that if you're doing a lean coffee, what can happen is a topic is introduced, and then only a few people talk about that topic in the time box. And lots of people are sit around passive, not sharing their perspective. By using the impediment cyclone, we take our problem, we put it right in the center. You can see here, I've put too many priorities. This was a real-life example. There were too many priorities. And you begin in the top left-hand corner. You say, what do I wish I knew about this problem earlier in life? So you can try and understand that particular challenge. You then go into the top right-hand corner. How have I addressed this particular problem before? Maybe it was in another company. Maybe it was in another team. You then go to the bottom right-hand corner, where you say, hey, what ideas do I have? Just blue sky thinking. This might be I saw an article on something, or I went to a conference and I learned a new technique. And then the last section is using improv, the technique yes and, where you build on someone else's idea. And in this section, all you're doing is you're grabbing one of the ideas that someone else has already contributed, and you're building on it. Yes, and we could do this as well. Yes, and we can do this as well. By doing this technique, we get lots of ideas very, very quickly about how to address a particular problem. And then it's a matter of selecting a few experiments, a few things to try next. We will come to some experiment canvases soon, which you can then use to identify what you're expecting from a hypothesis, an outcome perspective, alongside the data that will tell you you're on the right track. So try that as a lean coffee alternative. You can get lots of ideas together in a quick succession, analyze that, and move forwards. Is anyone familiar with the story of sky cycling and marginal gains? Silence. No? Okay. Cool. Good to know. Thank you. So, sky cycling, if you're unfamiliar, sky cycling had never really been successful on the big stage. In fact, British cyclists had never won the Tour de France. I think they'd won one medal in the Olympics, certainly not a gold. The director of performance, David Brailsford, he came to sky cycling in 2004, and rather than focusing on major changes, big changes to how they train and the materials they use and the way they recover, he focused on tiny changes, 1% improvements in lots of different areas. An example, a 1% improvement in the weight of a component on the bike, a 1% improvement in the massage recovery technique, a 1% improvement in the training method they use to get some explosive power. And all of these little 1% improvements across lots of different areas, they aggregate to create great results. Sky Cycling and British Cycling then went on to be some of the top performers in the Tour de France and the Olympics for years. All because they focused on small changes. And the thing about small changes, they're easier to do. The larger something is, the more barrier to getting started it is, the more scary it can be, the more time it takes. If you focus on a 1% improvement in lots of different areas across change management or across quality, you can create great impact across the wider system. This is, again, a visual. It's called the Marginal Gains Gauntlet. It's a series of prompts or questions you can use to start with a problem, i.e. quality or change management, and break that down into little 1% improvements. There are examples on there like, what would save us 2 minutes every day relating to this particular thing? Or what's the simplest next step we could take to reduce the impact of this particular challenge? Or what's a small piece of this that we could test in a different way? So again, I call it the Marginal Gains Gauntlet. It's simply a method where you start with a problem or an outcome you're trying to achieve and systematically break down into small steps, those small steps aggregating to bigger things. And one of the things I really want to impress upon everyone here is I increasingly think of myself as less an agilist these days and more as a scientist. If you think about the Agile Coaching Competency Matrix that Lisa Adkins created in her book over a decade ago, it has all these competencies of Agile coaches. And I genuinely believe nowadays a great competency of an agilist, anyone bringing about change in a company, is how scientific they can be, how they can co-create experiments with those involved to be methodical, to be data-focused, being empirical, coming back to some of the values that are often in many agile frameworks. And all you're simply doing is saying, right, we've got this thing we want to improve, whether it's, the morale of our company. We've got this thing we want to improve. What's our desired outcome? What do we want to see? What do we hypothesize will happen if we do this? And then what data are we expecting as a consequence? Then you run it, run that experiment, amplify the things that are working, dampen the things that aren't working. And this is where Agility, for me, is most powerful. I mentioned at the beginning, the key to agility is continuous improvement. And then retrospectives. Retrospectives build in feedback loops. Those feedback loops enable you to learn. Are we moving closer to our goal or further away? And you can catch that early. You can do something about it. You can plan your next steps, plan your attack. And this is where experimentation comes in. We've heard references from other speakers about the importance of co-creation. I think Mr. Ottinger is going to talk about co-creation relating to pair programming in one of the open space sessions. Co-creation and inviting people to design the change with you is, for me, one of the most powerful ways to reduce resistance to change. Because then people get to have their say in how something is done. Who here has built something from IKEA? See some hands, right. How did it feel when it was done? When you've got your nice Malmo shelf over there and you built it, how did it feel? Great. Why? Because you did it. It was your goddamn Malmo, and it was painful, and I lost a few parts, and it took 3 people when it said 2, but I built that, and it's mine. I own it. We feel a greater sense of accomplishment and ownership of something when we've built it ourselves, compared to going and buying the same Malmo, the same shelf, already built. You don't feel the same sense of ownership for it. And the same is true of changes we've designed. If you invite people to be part of change, there's less resistance. And we can, being intentional, intent-based leadership, we can communicate the intent. We want to change because of X. And then we trust the experts, the people actually doing it, to design it, to solve that problem. Because they probably have 20 different ways that you haven't even thought of. This experiment canvas, and I've got a leaner one as well that only has 4 sections, can help you be very systematic about designing experiments. This version has 9 quadrants, begins with the scientists, right? Who's performing the experiments? What's the problem we're trying to solve? What outcomes are we seeking? What's our hypothesis? What's the results we expect to see in terms of the data, the KPIs? Who are the people we need to invite to be involved, right? Who's actually going to be affected by the experiment? Because so often change is communicated in a way that people don't understand how it's going to impact them. And then the trials, what are the steps we're going to do to bring this experiment to life, to turn it into a reality? Because, again, a common problem I see with retrospectives, whether they're team level or across the company, is that actions are captured, nothing is done. I don't know about you, but if you want to achieve something, you've kind of got to do something about it. Saying you're going to do the thing doesn't get the thing done. Talking about doing the thing doesn't get the thing done. Going to a conference to learn about doing the thing doesn't get it done. Watching a video about the thing doesn't get it done. Listening to a podcast about the thing doesn't get it done. The only thing that gets it done is actually doing it. So it's really important to turn these problems into experiments that you actually enact. Because otherwise, we know what will happen. The same changes, the same problems will be coming up over and over. And that breeds frustration, and that breeds resentment, and then people lose trust in the process, and then they start going, well, that agile thing didn't work for us. So design experiments co-created with people. I'm going to leave you with 5 things. Again, you can just about read those. 5 things I want you to remember relating to improvement at scale. The first is that continuous improvement, funnily enough, is continuous. You don't need to wait for a retrospective, 2 weeks at the end, and then you announce there's a challenge. The sooner you catch a problem, the less waste there is, the less frustration builds up. So don't wait for a retrospective, do it continuously. The most powerful teams and companies I've worked with that have continuously improved, they've made it part of their DNA. They might include in a daily sync or a daily meeting, hey, how can we get better today? Or how are we getting on relating to this top goal? They make it a priority. In the interest of marginal gains, starting small. Think big, start small, learn fast. I love that quote from Better Value, Sooner, Safer, Happier, Jonathan Smart. That's one of the most Powerful quotes I can think of when it comes to change. Think big, big picture. What are we trying to achieve? Start small. Little experiment, something that has minimal barrier to getting started, and then learn fast. Have the feedback loops that enable you to learn. Is it working or not? Co-creation, the experiment canvas, all of these techniques, they are all designed to try and ensure that you are inviting people to be part of change, minimizing that resistance as a consequence. So co-create it with those involved and don't inflict change upon people. Everything's an experiment. So coming back to what I said earlier, from agilist to scientist, everything's an experiment. Start with a hypothesis. Design an experiment, test it, learn from it. But if you communicate it as an experiment, people know it's not permanent. It's not how we're going to be doing things forever. And again, that can reduce resistance. And lastly, it's all well and good identifying areas for improvement, but if again, Jenny was saying earlier, if your 100% capacity is focused on doing new stuff, then you won't have time to deliver upon these improvements. So it has to be a priority. It has to be something you're focused on. It has to be something there's time to enact, whether that's through incorporating slack time in your delivery processes, whether it's doing it via hackathons. Something has to be there, because if it's just a side of desk effort, hey, we want to do these improvements, but you just get around to it whenever you can, it won't get done. 5 things to remember about continuous improvements. Now, hopefully you can see this. I mentioned some cool stuff you will get, lots of templates. In fact, there's 110 of them freely accessible. If you scan that QR code there and provide me some feedback, because I'm really hungry when it comes to feedback. I'm fueled by it, like a fat kid with cake. If you don't give me feedback, I can't improve this session. I'd be a really bad advocate of continuous improvement if I didn't ask for feedback about this talk. So take a moment to provide that feedback. You will get all these cool templates you can use tomorrow if you like. Everything from retrospectives about all sorts of topics, 5 dysfunctions of a team, Queen the rock band. You asked me about singing, right? There's lots of musical-themed retrospectives in there. And the reason I often do fun-themed retrospectives is because we as humans, we enjoy escaping reality. And I'll demonstrate very quickly. If I do this, what is it? Queen. Yeah, if I said, just a small town girl living in a lonely world, what's that? Journey. If I went dun 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 dun, so no one told you life was gonna be this way. Yeah, clap. Friends. They're all things that we enjoy. We spend billions of pounds, dollars, euros every year on music, television, video games. And you don't have to use generic retrospective formats to get people talking. So there's lots of those in there. And that's it from me. Do you have any questions? Stunned silence.
Thank you very much.